First, we will have the welcome note by Nathan Bility, the country director for Cabo Verde, the Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, Mauritania, and Senegal. Then we will have the opening remarks by the Honorable Minister, C.D. Keita, Minister for Finance and Economic Affairs. Then we will have the key messages by our country economist, Mehwish Ashraf. This will be followed by the short media engagement, where we will have the media houses here present to ask few questions. Will be moderated by Ms. Fatim Baji, communication strategist. And the panelists will be Dr. Ahmad Ba, Executive Director, NANA, Dr. Chernobari, Vice Chancellor, Islamic International Open University, and the President of the Writers Association of the Gambia. We will also have Dr. Keba Marena, the Executive Director of the Westfield Clinic. After this panel, we will have the Q&A session, then closing remarks by Fayborough Office, the resident representative. We hope you will stay throughout the program. For now, I will invite our country director, Nathan Bility, to deliver the welcome note.
Good afternoon. Honorable Minister Keita, permanent secretaries, members of the diplomatic corps, members of the private sector and civil society, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. I'm delighted to welcome you to the launch event of the World Bank annual publication, the Gambia Economic Update, Coming Back Stronger. This is the second edition of the report. The first edition was published last year during the COVID-19 pandemic. This report is being released amid the conflict in Eastern Europe, the spillovers of which are being felt across the globe, including in the Gambia. For that reason, the report expands the analytics beyond the macro poverty update and shares policy suggestions on addressing structural challenges that can help the country weather external shocks. The report also stresses that evidence-based and data-driven policymaking will be key to raising the sustainable long-term growth potential of the economy, especially human capital accumulation and enhancing public service delivery. The Gambia's economy was hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, like most of the world, but has since begun to recover in 2021. Despite a sharp contraction in international travel during 2020, the country performed better initially than similar tourism-dependent peers, thanks to high official remittances and agricultural growth. The fiscal and current account deficits have begun to widen in 2021 as the government sought to kickstart the economy and invest in its infrastructure, but public debt has declined relative to GDP. Inflation picked up again in 2021 after cooling in 2020. The lockdown measures initially caused widespread job losses and high levels of food insecurity, but pandemic-related support measures that have helped support the poorest households and poverty levels are estimated to have fallen in 2021 after rising in 2020. Looking ahead, the Gambia looks set for modest growth in the medium term, driven by a rebound in tourism, and I'm glad to see His Honorable Excellency, the Minister of Tourism here, and as well as in the agriculture sector. However, a low vaccination rate, weather-related risks to agriculture, and the rising costs of living globally, exacerbated by the war in Ukraine, could slow this recovery. Although its direct investment and tourism and trade links with Russia and Ukraine are limited, the Gambia is a net importer of food, fertilizer, and fuel. As a result, widening current account deficit, rising inflation, particularly food inflation, eroding household incomes, and high fiscal deficits leading to domestic borrowing could threaten the sustainability and the recovery and hinder poverty reduction. Going forward, fiscal policy reforms are needed to build the fiscal space to respond to future shocks. Moreover, human capital will be key to sustained growth. The government will also need to improve its spending efficiency, including in its investments in social protection, education, and health. I am very excited that we have the great panels joining us today to discuss all of this. The macroeconomic landscape of the country and the state of data for evidence-based policy in human development sector, which is the special focus of this report. I would like to thank you all again for taking the time to join us this afternoon, and I look forward for an exciting, engaging discussion. Neofar.
Thank you very much, sir. We will now have the Minister for Finance and Economic Affairs, Honorable C.D. Keita, to deliver the opening remarks. You are welcome, sir.
Good afternoon, all. Resident representative of the World Bank, Nathan Beleti. Resident representative of the IMF. Permanent Secretary, Minister of Finance and Economic Affairs. Honorable Minister of Tourism, Honorable Ba. Representative of the development partners. Distinguished panelists, civil service organization here and present. Members of the media present, ladies and gentlemen, and all other protocols duly and respectively observed. It is with great pleasure that I welcome you all to the launch of the 2022 Gambia Economic Update, which is quite crucial during these unprecedented times, as it provides key insights on the economy and sets the pace of the economic policy reform and planning over the short to medium term. Let me seize this opportunity to extend our appreciation to the World Bank team for their unflinching support and the time and effort dedicated to the production of this brilliant report on the Gambian economy. On that note, I will take this opportunity to thank the country economist, Madam Ashraf, for having been around for 3 years, and this is the pinnacle of her assignment. As she concludes her engagement, we are pleased to launch the report.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Minister.
Our government is more than ready to implement the reforms based on the findings of this report and count on the continued support of the bank group and other development partners to achieve this. As the report rightly states, the Gambia got off relatively lightly from the COVID-19 pandemic and embarked on a quick path to recovery, despite the negative impact on some of our key growth drivers, especially in the areas of tourism and trade. GDP growth is estimated to be 4.3% in 2021, a remarkable performance when compared to 0.6% registered in 2020. As a result of the strong rebound in the services and industry sector, revenue performance, on the other hand, highlights the need for us to ramp up the domestic revenue mobilization efforts, as we have tallied behind a little bit. Domestic resources mobilized in 2021 declined compared to that of 2020. To that effect, we have embarked on a series of reforms to improve the tax administration and streamline tax expenditure. This includes the establishment of a tax policy unit within the Directorate of Economic Policy and Research, under which a comprehensive tax policy for the country will be developed. Public debt increased slightly as we depart from the debt relief initiative from 2020 and the debt sustainability initiative. However, we will continue to consolidate and manage our debt portfolio while simultaneously providing for infrastructure financing in the medium to long term. Our impressive growth trajectory has been put to a test with the emergence of the recent Ukraine crisis, which has further disrupted the supply chains and increased global inflation, leading to a tightening of the monetary policies. The effects of this crisis are now being felt domestically, as Russia and Ukraine are global players in the supply of basic commodities such as wheat, oil, gas, and maize, which are highly consumed in the Gambia. In fact, 30% of our wheat imports used to come from Ukraine. Additionally, the war's impact on fuel prices has also trickled down into the economy, collectively putting strong inflationary pressures on the economy. The ultimate and very worrying effect of this is the erosion of real incomes and the high risk of pushing more of the population into poverty. This year's themes resonates very well with us, as it is the effects of the devastating events of 2020 and 2020, and focus on resilience that will pull us through 2021, have reinforced our belief in ourselves to push through adversity and come back better. With that said, our government's aim is to leave no one behind, especially the most vulnerable groups in society. This is why government is doing all it can amid all the challenges to continue to subsidize certain vital sectors such as fuel, even though it is a very big pressure on the budget. We will continue to make health, education, and social safety top priorities. And to achieve our goals in these areas, I will echo an important aspect of this report, the significance of timely and accurate data to aid and enhance human capital and ensure effective policy design and implementation. We are increasingly focused on data-driven policy formulation. And going forward, both the government and the ministry will use data very extensively to ensure that all policy pronouncements and policy directions are supported by robust data in order to guide decisions. This report will serve as a guide to a comprehensive review of our policies with keen focus on recent economic developments and our economic outlook. The challenges ahead of us will be weathered if we focus on the priorities we've set for ourselves. It will provide useful policy recommendations to spur growth and progress on our path to bouncing back better, and most importantly, building resilience in our economy to withstand future shocks. I think what has become very pronounced now is that these shocks are going to be living with us. We don't know when the next shocks will come. So what is important as government is to build resilient policies guided by robust data in order for you to be able to bounce back as shocks come across. We eagerly look forward to our successful future engagements as we embark on implementing the recommendations of this report and to promote macroeconomic stability and growth. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, I look forward to further solidifying our relationship, and we work together for the agenda to improve socio-economic development of the country. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, sir. I will now invite our country economist, Mehwish Ashraf. She will take us through the key messages from the report. Mehwish.
Get the light off. Get the light off. Can I get my presentation, please? Good afternoon. 4.3%. Does this number ring a bell to you? Probably yes, to most of you. For the benefit of all, 4.3% is the provisional estimate of real GDP growth for the Gambia for 2021, as released by the Gambia Bureau of Statistics a month ago. Let's stick with this number for now until we get to April next year, and then we will get to see the final output, economic output for 2021. Now, what does this number mean? This means that Gambia is recovering from the shock of the pandemic, which is encouraging and in line with regional and global trends. The second natural question arises, is this enough? Not really. The long-term economic potential of the country's economy, as estimated by the World Bank, is above 5%. Third question, will this growth help reduce poverty, and for that matter, extreme poverty, and improve prosperity in the country? It will, and we have seen poverty declining in 2021 thanks to recovering labor markets, but not to the extent that we'd like to see. What needs to be done? And or even before going there, what are the headwinds to the near and medium-term outlook for the Gambia? Many, chiefly being the war in Ukraine and its impact on global food, fuel, fertilizer, supply chains, and prices, which will dampen the recovery and economic outlook for the Gambia. So what needs to be done to make Gambia resilient and prosperous? A Gambia that has skilled labor force, that has better and higher paying private sector jobs, higher exports, and the list goes on. Number one, build fiscal resilience. Why? The Gambia relies heavily on donor grants, which are volatile and have the potential to disrupt fiscal policy, or in other words, expenditure plans. The Gambia has also a high level of debt, which takes away almost a quarter of domestic revenues to service it and shrinks the bank to spend on the priority needs for its people, such as building roads, constructing hospitals, training teachers, etc. What needs to be done? Collect more taxes, rationalize existing projects that are financed by debt, and enter into new borrowing only as a last resort and on the cheapest terms available. Second, diversify the economy, as it's largely based on agriculture and tourism, both are seasonal sectors. What needs to be done? Enhance Gambia's competitiveness through connectivity, such as local and regional value chains, airports, seaports, as well as harness tradable sectors. Number three, invest smartly, as years of malinvestment and underinvestment have constrained private sector-driven growth in the country. How can it be done? Ensure efficient formulation, selection, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of new projects through all cycles, and start today. Number four, and last, formulate evidence-based and data-driven policies, because data is powerful. It shows progress or lack of it. It shows what is working, what is not, and it provides a feedback mechanism to help us do things better next time. This applies to all sectors, including human capital, which is vital to realizing the potential of this country. Imagine a Gambian, or each Gambian, if they have unique national identification number saved in the civil registry, which is then linked with other government information systems, such as passport issuance. It would be a matter of just 5 minutes to go verify all the auto-filled biodata information, compared to what it currently takes almost 30 minutes to do that step. That would mean essentially 80 passports applications could be submitted a day compared to 15 currently. That is a big or a huge leap in efficient service delivery, and that is what Gambia should aim for. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mehvis, for that wonderful presentation. We will now invite the Honorable Minister on stage and our country director. The minister has the media has few questions for you guys. So please. Second, let them bring the chair. Yes, yeah. Members of the press, if you have questions, you can come in front so that we can move very fast. Yeah. No, two is okay. It's only two people. Two is okay. No, after that, I'm learning my presentation. Two is okay now. Two is enough. Two is okay. Yeah. Honorable Nathan. Yeah. Oh, let me take this off. Yeah. Okay, members of the press, if you have questions, you can come in front, please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lolly M. Camara from QTV. I have a question for the Honorable Minister. We noticed that COVID-19 has played a huge role on our economy. As we speak now, we are seeing the update from the World Bank. What is your ministry going to do to improve or would focus on improving more inclusive jobs, especially for women and children? Because we know that COVID-19 has really impacted certain sectors like tourism, and most of the young people were engaged into tourism, and women as well. So what is your government going to do to improve or to focus on creating more inclusive jobs for women and children, young people? Thank you for now.
Thank you very much for a very good question. And the question is spot on. As these countries' demographic is 60% are in the youth category. And you've rightly mentioned, COVID is a once-in-a-lifetime disruption to the socio-economic system globally. And the Gambia is not unique. And for the Gambia, it has really affected the most productive sectors. Tourism used to provide 25% of our GDP, and this was shut down entirely due to COVID. And that is not an understatement. It's quite a huge. And it's like COVID is just the starting. As we were coming out of COVID, other second wave came. A third wave came. So it's a thing that is unfolding. As if those are not enough COVID-related challenges, we now have the Ukraine and Russia war. So no economy is in good times as we speak. All government economies are under huge and immense pressure. And for the Gambia, as you know, we are a country that is mainly supported by donor financing. We have a number of budget support that complements, and once again, thanks to our donors for standing by us in these hard times. Notwithstanding that, the government has really looked inward and come up with policies to ensure that these youth and women are not left out. The Minister of Trade has just launched a national employment policy which is designed to generate 150,000 jobs in the next 5 years. And the jobs will be centered towards entrepreneurship, self-employment, targeting the women and youths particularly. The Ministry of Finance will ensure that the macroeconomic framework and policies are conducive towards fostering a private sector-led growth and also diversify the economy. The first challenges we are having as we speak right now is the concentrated nature of our revenue. We will have to diversify. As you know, we are tax-based, and it's a catch-22 situation. If you increase the tax, you're putting pressure, and that is automatically translated to cost of living. We as a government have not just left out have focused on just the youth and women. As we speak right now, government is really looking out for everybody in the country. We are issuing at great cost to the public coffers a subsidy on the price of fuel. And as we speak, even though word is out there, a subsidy on the price of fertilizer, and also even certain essential commodities like rice. Why I say rice? Because there is zero duty on rice. Technically, that's an implicit subsidy because this is a revenue source we could have got. That being the case, this government is an inclusive government, and we don't want anybody to be left out. We call on the youths and the women to also step up. The challenges we have is the level of employment and engagement of these sectors. They should feel engaged, they should feel welcome, and the doors of government are open to all to come to the table and contribute. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I am Pamodi Cham of the Point newspaper. I also report for CTV Africa. I have question, and maybe it can be answered, both of you. This has to do with the inflation, the increase in inflation in the country. I mean, recently, the Gambia government, through the central bank, decided to increase the monetary policy rate by 1%. So I just want to know, do you think that is a good idea to fight inflation? Because we realize that many people are complaining in the country, and then food items are going higher and higher every day. By increasing the monetary policy rate by 1%, is that the good idea in fighting inflation? Thank you.
Yes, I think inflation should be fought on all fronts because of the impact it creates in the economic system. When in an environment of high inflation, it causes a lot of uncertainties. It enables people not to trust prices, and people cannot plan effectively. That is why all economies globally fight inflation, and all tools should be deployed. Inflation is fought on two fronts. You fight inflation on the monetary policy side, on the money supply side, as well as the fiscal policy, that is government taxes and expenditures. What the central bank did to increase the policy lending rate by 1% to 11% is a step in the right direction. It's just an adequate dose to be able to tame the monetary supply side of the inflation. As you know, most of the inflation in the country is supply induced because why the inflation went up last month was the input of the increase of the reduction in the price of the fuel. When we were looking at the price of fuel last month, not this month, the level of subsidy was reduced because of the pressure. And the index, the inflation index, fuel is an all-encompassing, and it has an automatic one-on-one mapping to the inflation. That is why that was done. But notwithstanding, on the fiscal side, we are also mindful to ensure that we are supporting the monetary policy side by not immediately withdrawing the subsidies. Because if you increase the subsidies, it's like you are adding additional firepower, and that will increase inflation. So both the central bank and the fiscal policy are working in tandem in order to fight inflation. It is very, very important that what is happening in the Gambia in terms of inflation is not unique to the Gambia. The United States, the UK have all had the highest inflation that they are dealing with in the last 40 years. So it's a global phenomenon, and Gambia is not unique to that. The tools we have at our disposal have just been released. And of course, as you know, economic phenomena are lagging effect. We may not be able to see the immediate impact, but we expect, based on the models and the projections, that with this 1% raise in the price of the MPC rate and the fiscal side, we expect to bring back inflation under 1 digit. Gambia has traditionally been a 1-digit inflation country, and it is only global phenomenon like we are witnessing now that we have crossed the 2-digit line, and the government will do all it can to bring it back to be under 1%, to be under 1 digit, single digit rather. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Makutu Mane from Foria newspaper. My question goes to the country director. When speaking, you made mention of poverty level falling in 2021 compared to 2020, sorry. I want you to elaborate more on that. How?
So thank you for that question. I think what I want to focus on is the importance of government intervention in terms of responding to the needs of the poor and vulnerable during times of crisis. What we saw, based on the recovery of the Gambian economy, particularly during the crisis, was a strongly performing agricultural sector, where predominantly is the main source of income for most Gambians. In addition to that, we did see a recovering tourism sector, obviously not to the level that one would have wanted, but in comparison to many countries across the globe, and particularly in Africa, what we saw in Gambia was encouraging. Having said that, what we're seeing now is very disturbing, and for that reason, and with the inflation numbers that the Honorable Minister just mentioned of double digits, our biggest concern today is how this affects the poor and the vulnerable in the country. And for that reason, we continue to work very closely, particularly with the Ministry of Finance and with other development partners, on how to support the government in putting in place the right macroeconomic policies. But at the same time, we have to be equally concerned with supporting investment and growing the economy. And for that reason, I think there is a need to focus on the sectors where we think the Gambia has great potential. In the case of the World Bank, we believe that the tourism sector is a very important one, because it provides a big boost to the economy, but it also addresses the jobs issue. It addresses the supply chain issue. It addresses the sustainability of Gambia's natural resources. So for that reason, that's one sector where we think we have to continue to engage and capitalize on. The other sector, of course, is continuing the investments in the agriculture sector. I think that the Gambian agriculture sector has tremendous opportunities, and there's lots that can be done to improve productivity, to improve the opportunities to become a major supply chain for the country. So this is another area where we think we need to focus. All of this being said, we still believe that there's a strong role, an important role for the government to play in safety nets, in providing support to the poor and the vulnerable, because during these times, particularly in times when we see such high inflation, the first group to get impacted is the poor and the vulnerable. And for that reason, we will continue to work closely with the authorities to do whatever we can to help mitigate these impacts.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, Honorable Minister. That is all for this session. We will take a 5-minute break while we set up for the panel discussion, so you can stretch your leg if you want to walk around a little bit.
One, two.
Okay. Thank you all. We will now have Mehwish will take us through the macro findings from the economic update. Mehwish.
It's me again. Can I have the presentation, please? And can you guys, see the screen at the back? Or is it's there? It's better there? Good afternoon once again. I'm here to walk you through the key macro findings of the report. Aji, can you move the slides for me? Here. We saw when we analyzed for this report, we saw that the Gambia performed better in 2020 compared to many of its peers, but its recovery in 2021 was more gradual. Some of the resilience factors that helped Gambia during pandemic were remittance finance, private construction, public infrastructure projects, and in 2021 we saw reviving tourist arrivals and the resumption of public consumption after the lockdown measures were lifted. One of the factors that seems to be a bit more cyclical in the Gambia's growth story is agriculture sector, chiefly crop sector, which has been showing some mixed performance. For 2022, it provided a cushion against the impact of the pandemic, but for 2021, the sector contracted, and that's primarily because there was low rainfall, erratic rainfall, and that's how it's demonstrating the vulnerability to weather shocks. Going forward, we see that the outlook is dampened by global contagion from the war in Ukraine, although direct investment, tourism, and trade links with Russia and Ukraine are limited, but the Gambia is a net importer of food, fertilizer, and fuel. As a result, we expect GDP growth to be modest, and this modest growth is dependent upon four main factors: the economic recovery globally from the war, as well as pandemic, political stability, which we expect to continue as a result of the successful elections in 2021 and 2022, renewed focus on policy implementation by the new government, and normal weather conditions that will support agriculture sector performance. On the external sector, we saw that the current account deficit widened as the economy reopened. It also demonstrated the investment and consumption growth as more imports grew. Exports also recovered to some extent. Remittances were a record for another year, and they covered almost 3/4 of the trade deficit. However, official transfers were quite low. They fell to almost 1/5 of their level in 2020. As a result, the current account deficit widened. Nonetheless, capital flows and foreign direct investment flows were healthy. They boosted foreign exchange reserves, which were around 6 months of next year's of imports of goods and services as of end 2021. And this kind of a healthy level of foreign exchange reserves somehow contributed to a more or less stable exchange rate for 2021. We expect the pressure on the current account deficit to persist over the medium term. which reflects the high import prices because of the war, the commodity shock from the war, and public investment projects which are by nature import intensive. We expect the external financing resources to stay the same. FTI and capital transfers will continue to finance the current account deficit, and so we project foreign exchange reserves to hover around 4 months of next year's of imports. When it comes to inflation, and we have heard Honorable Minister and our country director talking about it, we have seen inflation beginning to rise in 2021 after 2020. Initially, it was the recovery of consumer demand, but then high prices on food, and we are continuing to see that in 2022 as well. And we expect that inflation is going to stay high in the medium term as global supply disruptions continue, high commodity prices continue, and it will erode the real income of households. And this high inflation phenomena calls for cautious tightening of the accommodative monetary policy stance that has been in place by the central bank. And our Honorable Minister talked about this, and we saw an action recently in terms of increasing the monetary policy rate by 1 percentage point by the central bank. On the positive side, we did see that the private sector credit rebounded strongly in 2021 as the economy reopened, and two sectors that were the main performers there were the construction sector and the retail and wholesale trade. On the fiscal side, we saw that the fiscal deficit more than doubled in 2021, but that doubling was basically because the government wanted to kickstart the economy coming from the pandemic year and wanted to invest in physical infrastructure, which is very good when it comes to expanding the economy's productivity. We saw, and as a result, we saw that the capital expenditures which were financed by the government's own resources, they reached a record level of 3% of GDP, never seen before in Gambia's history. Recurrent expenditure declined as pandemic-related support was withdrawn. However, revenue performance was modest, largely because the economic recovery was delayed in 2021. And we also saw grants falling drastically due to slow implementation of some of the reforms tied to those budget support grants. Nonetheless, we saw that the public debt relative to GDP declined and the maturity profile of domestic debt slightly improved, which are welcome steps to improving debt sustainability and debt management of the country. Going forward, we see that the fiscal consolidation will be delayed for another year due to war. Fuel revenues will decline because the government is avoiding full pass-through to support its consumer and shielding the households in the Gambia from the high international oil prices. And we are also expecting subsidies to increase to partially offset the rising fuel, fertilizer, and food prices. And Honorable Minister talked about this this morning. We are expecting that the fiscal deficit is going to stay at the same level as we have seen in 2021, just to kind of accommodate the shock that's coming from the war. But then we are expecting, and we are basically hinging on the government commitment to go back to fiscal consolidation starting 2023, which would be based on both the revenue reforms such as tax administration reforms, tax policy reforms such as tax expenditure monitoring framework, and we are also expecting reforms on the expenditure side when it comes to public finance management, state-owned enterprises, and civil service. Looking ahead, what are some of the risks that we see to the outlook that I just presented to you from the report? We see that the new COVID variants that are taking hold in other parts of the world, chiefly US and Europe, if that continues to stay there, that may impact the recovery. The big main risk is the war in Ukraine. If protected, that can even weigh down the economic outlook of the Gambia. Erratic weather is something which we have seen being realized in the Gambia's economy, and that it still serves as a risk. And lack of fiscal reform and of solid institutional and governance structures to move forward with some of the reforms, important reforms that are needed to ensure macro-fiscal stability. We have seen, as I mentioned before, we have seen successful elections that have largely diminished political risks, and this is a very good development for the Gambia in a region which has been marred recently by a lot of political instability. We believe that growth potential of the country can be unlocked using 4 main buckets of reforms. The first one is to strengthen governance and institutional structures. The second one is to build fiscal resilience to respond to future shocks. The third one is to address burning constraints to investment, productivity, and low diversification of the economy. And the fourth one, which is also the focus of the report, is about formulating evidence-based and data-driven policies to improve public service delivery. Let me stop here. Thank you.
I will now invite our poverty economist, Serine Toure. Serine will take us through the key poverty findings from the report. Serine.
The pointer is not working.
It's not working?
No.
Okay, I'll tell ID to.
Okay, that's not working.
I'll tell ID to.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my honor to present the findings from the from a poverty perspective on the from the economic update. Oh, okay, perfect. Okay. All right. So we had to work on technical glitches. So a bit of an overview of what my presentation would be. First, I will provide some perspectives on what we knew about poverty before the pandemic based on available data, and then our estimates of what we expected poverty to have been in the absence of COVID, the counterfactual scenario, and some projections of what poverty currently is. And then we'll talk a little bit on the recovery, the nature of the recovery, and some thoughts on looking ahead in terms of shaping the recovery to really match with the theme of this report, which is coming back stronger. So basically then, let's talk about poverty in 3 states. Before the pandemic, available data shows that poverty was estimated to have been about 48.6%. And this is based on national poverty rate, based on survey data that was available in 2015. Now, what this means is that essentially a little less than half of Gambians were considered to be poor. And what we mean by poor in this context is the inability to meet the basic needs. And when we look at differences in poverty rates, the incidence of poverty between rural and urban areas, poverty is more of a rural phenomenon. Almost 7 out of 10 individuals in rural areas were poor compared to 3 out of 10 in urban areas. But interestingly, what these numbers also mask is that when you look at poverty as a share of the population, it is increasingly becoming an urban phenomenon. That is, when we look at some of our very concentrated districts, particularly in the West Coast region, in the Brikama LGA, there is high incidence of poverty in that area. So whilst there is poverty very high in rural areas, but there's also growing concerns about increasing levels of urban poverty in the Gambia. Now, what would have happened in the absence of COVID? Now, we combined survey data that we had available in 2015 with sectoral data to look at, to project what poverty would have been in the absence of COVID. So we estimate that poverty would have declined by 2 percentage points in 2020. And a lot of that decline is actually associated with the fact that there's been increased economic activity between 2015 and 2019. There's been large inflow of remittances in the country, but an important constraint to poverty reduction in the Gambia points to the fact that the structural composition of growth in the Gambia seems to be, like, for example, if you look at the agricultural sector, the growth in the agricultural sector between 2015 and 2019 has just been under 1%, 0.6 percentage points. And when you compare the growth in agriculture with growth in the other sectors, such as in industry and in services, those sectors are growing significantly much higher. For example, if you look at construction-driven industry sector, it grew by almost 11% between 2015 and 2019. And you look at the services sector as well, there's been a lot of growth prior to the pandemic. But agriculture, which employs a huge part of the rural populace, but also a good number of the poor connected to the agricultural sector, growth in the agricultural sector has been very low between 2015 and 2019. Now, what is poverty like currently? So projections that we do combining, again, survey data with macro data, sectoral data, show that poverty is likely to have increased in 2020 up to 50%. So more or less like a 2 percentage point increase in poverty in 2020. Now, we've recently had access to new data, which has been collected during the pandemic, and what this shows is an even larger increase than 50%. So COVID really had a large effect on poverty in the Gambia. There's been a huge increase in poverty from the 2015 levels. And part of that increase in poverty happens because if you look at the initial effects of the pandemic, the large contractions in the labor market resulted in a lot of job losses and near universal income losses in the economy. And as a result, a lot of people, because they lost their jobs, they lost their sources of income. As a result, there is increased levels of incidence of poverty in the Gambia. And when you look at data that we project over time through the high-frequency phone survey data that we collected during the pandemic, you see that at the onset of the pandemic, job losses were significantly very high, right? And particularly in the urban areas. And the differences in terms of like the labor market contractions between rural and urban areas stems from the fact that in part because there's been differences in the lockdowns, the strictness of the lockdowns in urban areas compared to rural areas, but also because in urban areas there's been a lot of the services sector and informal activities, and these were adversely affected by the pandemic. But again, also in 2020, we had good rains, and this supported growth in the agricultural sector. A huge rebound in 2020, the sector growing by almost 10.6%, and this supported also a lot of the poor households and created the differences in terms of like poverty between the rural and urban households. And of course, in a forthcoming report, which will be the poverty assessment for the Gambia, we'll leverage recently available data to discuss at greater length the different trajectories on poverty in the Gambia, and that will be coming shortly. Now, do we see a recovery inside? Well, it's kind of a mixed story, but of course, on average, what we do see is that there appears to be some recovery in the labor market. And when you look at other indicators of welfare as well, such as the incidence of food insecurity, that seems to be declining over time. During the pandemic, a huge amount of, a large proportion of the poorest households and those in rural areas reported high incidence of food insecurity. But what we see from, for example, before the pandemic to now is that there is somewhat of a recovery that's happening in terms of food insecurity. And this is sort of aligned to recent recovery that we see in the labor market, especially there's been increase in job uptake in the labor market. And we see that when you look at the rich versus the poorest households, we see faster recovery among the poor who were adversely affected by the pandemic initially. So that's showing us signs that there is some amount of recovery that's happening in the economy. And another interesting thing that we saw from the data also is there's been a lot of transitions into agriculture during the pandemic. A lot of people moving back into agriculture, especially the poorest and those that are in that are working in industry, moving back into agriculture, really harnessing the potential of the sector that happened in 2020, and that in a way is also supporting the rebound from the pandemic. What do we see from looking ahead? Well, whilst the recovery is in sight, but there are also concerns about, and I think this has been mentioned significantly, there are concerns about the spillover effects from the war in Ukraine and the effect of these on the rising basic food, fuel, and fertilizer prices, and the effect of that on agriculture. Because when you look at the rebound in agriculture in 2020, a huge part of that had to do with good rains. There's also evidence of increased land use, but there's also evidence of timely provision of inputs. So with the war in Ukraine, the effect of that on food prices and the effect of that on the availability of fertilizers could potentially have an effect on the growth of the agricultural sector, which, as we saw from earlier, it's a crucial sector for poverty reduction in the Gambia. So what lessons do we draw from to strengthen the recovery? Well, as we saw, agriculture really did serve as an important social safety net during the pandemic, supporting poverty reduction in poverty, particularly among the rural areas. But there is need to harness the sector as an opportunity, particularly for the looming food crisis. And what we see is this is particularly important for the poorest households because they spend almost 60% of their earnings on food. So rising food prices really presents itself as a risk to the vulnerability of the poor and might shift them deeper into poverty. So the reforms, necessary reforms in the agricultural sector, for example, looking beyond crop production into, say, horticulture, but also increasing off-farm labor market activities in rural areas. I think because if you look at the agricultural calendar in the Gambia, it's pretty much about 5 to 6 months. So the remaining 6 months, the farmers really don't have much of an option. So increasing off-farm labor market opportunities in rural areas, reforming the rural labor market to increase off-farm labor market opportunities, it would be also part of a good reform to the agricultural sector. There's also a need to diversify beyond tourism so that we can strengthen the resilience of the tourism sector. And I think an important lesson that we also draw from the pandemic is the swift action by the government in the cash transfer programs that were rolled out really supported the resilience of the poor. The data that we got from the high-frequency survey shows that almost 60% of the poorest households receive some of these government assistance through the cash transfer programs, and these contributed in helping their resilience to the pandemic. And with that, I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sering. To discuss the microfinance and the poverty finance, I will invite the following people on stage. We have Hamidou Jawara, economist. He will be moderating the session. Next, we have Mamadou Juldebari, IMF resident representative. Then we have Abdoulaye Diallo, PS, Ministry of Finance, and Dr. Mamadou Mustafa Fane, Associate Professor. I can put this in the middle here for both of you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam MC. I think it's an honor to be actually moderating this session, really to try and elaborate on some of the findings that came out from the report, and some of which were presented by Mehwist and also Sering Toure. Yeah, so I have with me, I think, 3 fantastic speakers that can put these things into context, right? So I have Mr. Barry, who is the resident representative of the IMF. We have Mr. Abdoulaye Diallo, the permanent secretary, Ministry of Finance, and also my own senior and head of department, actually, Dr. Mamadou Mustafa Fane, who is the current dean of the School of Business and Public Administration, University of the Gambia. So, gentlemen, welcome to welcome to this session. So I would start with Mr. Barry. I think from the presentations that were done, particularly by Mehwist, she has shown us that if you look at the Gambian economy, it was able to cope with the impacts of the pandemic. We can say even far better than a lot of our peers. Right. So the question to you is, what do you think were the reasons why Gambia was able to cope with the impacts of the pandemic, and also looking ahead, especially in current times? What lessons can we draw from the kind of response that was done to really help us to cope with the pandemic, particularly with regards to the challenges posed by the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister, colleagues. I would like, before starting, thank Mary's for the excellent work she has been doing for the Gambia, and also for the work that she has put together, to bring us together today to have this presentation. So regarding the question that you mentioned, what the Gambia has done to resist better during the pandemic, I will say the pandemic found Gambia in a good footing, because it happened in early 2020. We just concluded the debt deferral for the Gambia. So Gambia benefited from its main partners, a debt deferral for 5 years that liberated some space, that helped the Gambia benefit from a program from the IMF, but also World Bank to be able to be engaged. So to come to a good starting point. But the second, I will say, the government was very proactive at the beginning to come with a comprehensive plan of how to respond to the pandemic. And that was strongly supported by the international community, by the private sector. Let's mention it. In the case of the Gambia, the private sector also played a key role in helping the government implement the response plan that they put together to be able to respond to the pandemic. So, and then in addition to that, having that plan, I will say the coordinated policy dialogue between Central Bank, Minister of Finance, and other stakeholders helped also ensure that the policies that the Central Bank was taking in terms of loosening the monetary policy to support the economy was complementary to what the government was doing in implementing the recovery, the response plan that they put together. Now we come into 2020 to 2021. I think the analysis that Mary's presented well, we fully align in terms of the assessment of the situation. And also what he presented from the outlook. I think we work closely together and we align with that. But the Ukraine crisis hit the Gambia in the situation where the country was recovering from the Omicron wave. So with the expectation that the recovery will be strong. But what we have seen with the Ukraine crisis is that we have high fuel prices, energy prices, and food prices that was already compounding some trend of increase in food prices that we started experiencing since mid-2021. So that is providing a huge burden to the budget for the Gambia. As the minister rightly mentioned, they are losing a lot of money in terms of from the oil sector due to the fact that despite the effort that the government have done, increasing the prices from January to now by 25%, but as the prices are increasing, they continue to lose a significant amount in that area. So I will cite here I talked to the GRA for the last month. They lost about 200 million, so it's a lot of money that the Gambia is losing. They are also confronted on the, as Mavish mentioned, that this volatility on grant support that they are receiving in the Gambia. Budget support have been lower than expected, both in 2021, but also in 2022. The government also has a lot of non-fiscal resources that are in the budget that could be difficultly recovered given the situation in which the world is in now. So that will put a lot of constraint into the budget while the government is trying to respond to the impact of the Ukraine crisis. So it will require from the government some of arbitrage to see how to prioritize, what needs to be prioritized in terms of ensuring that enough resources are provided to the vulnerable groups will be important. Also working with the central bank to ensure that policies that are conducted there is supportive to what the Ministry of Finance is doing. The recent increase in the policy rate, I think, go to that direction, although it will have some implication on growth and also the stability of the banking sector. But those policies need to be put together in order to ensure that some of the inflation pressure that we are seeing and the volatility of the exchange rate are managed. So for now, I will stop here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Barry, for really sharing with us your ideas in terms of what you think, were done right, and, how the government could really help us to build a strong recovery. Yeah, so my next question goes to Dr. Fane. Right? Yeah, so we know the pandemic, as was shown by the findings from this particular report, had some impact on poverty, right? In particular. So the question is, how do you think the pandemic has affected job losses and also poverty in the Gambia? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jawara, and thanks for the colleagues and honorable ministers and others. I think the pandemic hits us very hard, and we know that the poverty levels in the Gambia rose as the study showed, from 48% to more than 50% now, which is a big cause for concern. The question is now, how do we deal with that? I think the government did a very good job by intervening and trying to provide a lot of support to the population. The data shows that poverty is increasing faster increased by 5% in the urban compared to rural area. That shows that urban area poverty is a very big problem nowadays, that we need to really focus on urban as well, not only focusing on rural areas as we used to focus on. But I feel that we need to really look at we really need to dissect those results further, to look at the regional dimension of poverty, not only focusing on rural and urban, but has to go deeper than looking at the different regions too. How does it really hit CRR compared to LRR and so forth? I think that's also good when it comes to intervention in the Gambia. But I feel that when it comes to poverty during the COVID, I think the interventions through the NAFA projects that we had in the Gambia, through the donors, they helped a lot in terms of offsetting the problem that we have in the agricultural sector. Despite all of those, I think there is hope from the study that the country we are still doing a good job, that we can still do better when it comes to like post-COVID. We are still in COVID, but I think we can still improve. Looking at the issue of the agricultural sector, which is the hardest sector hit, and tourism sector as well. What do we do to cope with the COVID? And we see that the support from the government is there, but we still can do more by trying to help farmers and see what can we do to help farmers to in terms of their incomes, to grow their incomes, by trying to go through the value chain, try to promote the SMEs when it comes to the farmers. They always grow, but at the small level. How do we grow the output of the farmers by trying to encourage them to grow more when it comes to the government? So how can we encourage farmers to grow more? I think we need more support from government to help farmers to really produce more to cope with COVID. COVID is still there, but how can we really, because the challenge is more of the rural setting. I know urban is a problem, but rural is definitely, that's why the problem is there more it's harder in the rural areas. But how do we deal with that? I think the support is there, but we still can do more by helping the farmers to offset the shock that they had when it comes to the COVID. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Fani, on those insights regarding, the effect of the pandemic on poverty and what you think should be done moving forward in terms of even analysis. Thank you for that. My next question goes to Mr. Jallo from the Ministry of Finance. In the presentations that were done before our session, Mehwis did talk about, the fact that we need to build fiscal resilience. Right, and we know that during the pandemic, right, that fiscal deficit in particular, increased. But if you look at the country's debt profile, it's in good shape. Right. So, what challenges, was the ministry grappling with regards to these things, and what did you do to help the country to really stay on course? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. One of the reasons why the fiscal deficit is higher in 2021 compared to 2022 is the following reasons. Number one is that the government of the Gambia depends a lot on taxes, and to be more precise also, international trade taxes, and within international trade taxes, petroleum revenues. If you look at 2020 compared to 2021, the prices of international petroleum products was essentially on the downward trend, or very steep. It was on the downward trend in 2020. So there was virtually no subsidy, or very limited subsidy, on petroleum products compared to 2021. And it is now that people are complaining the Russia-Ukraine crisis, the prices of petroleum products are skyrocketing. This is true. But a lot of people also didn't know that this price hike started way back around September of 2021. But government did a lot of efforts to try and subdue the retail price of these petroleum products. Prices were not increased around September up to December of 2021, or even up to January of 2021. It was kept very low, or the pump price was stabilized, was relatively stable over this period. But within this same period, prices were on the upward trend. There wasn't even that much volatility in the prices, but they were rising upwards. And even with that, government decides to stabilize the prices of petroleum products. So this problem started not now. It's aggravated in 2020, in February of 2022 and beyond, but it started way back in around September. So the reason why we could not perform on tax revenue as a relative to GDP in 2021 compared to 2022, it's because of this reason. One, the petroleum prices were highly subsidized in 2021, and not only petroleum prices, even flour. Our current minister was at the Ministry of Trade, fighting, and was very aggressive to make sure that the prices of flour and related products, essential products, remain stabilized. He is here. He was very instrumental in this. So, so these were some of the reasons why tax revenue as a percentage of GDP declined. And also, not only that, because of GDP also was much better in 2021 compared to 23. So in relative terms, 2021 was better. 2020 was better than 2021. But it's not only that. If you look at in 2020 compared to 2021, there was a lot of goodwill from our development partners. To be quite honest, they did extremely well to ensure that government is able to respond to the pandemic in 2020. So there was a lot of donor support in 2020 compared to 2021. And in 2021, we were expecting some direct budget support from our key partners who are very instrumental in our development efforts. Those budget supports did not materialize. Mr. Barry just mentioned them. And if you look at from the spending side also, you know, when there are economic contractions, as a government, you need to respond using counter-cyclical policies. All around the world, governments or countries are experiencing negative economic growth rates. Most of their economies contracted. But we are lucky with together with our partners, at least, and of course, the diaspora also contributed a lot, because the scale of remittances that we have seen in 2020, we have never witnessed that. So it has significantly also contributed to make sure that at least the economy did not contract, but we registered a near zero economic growth rate. But as a government, we should be responsible enough also in a period of economic difficulties. We need to come up with counter-cyclical policies, and we did exactly that in 2021. One of them, we have to provide a substantial amount of subsidy, fertilizer subsidy to our farmers. This was in excess of $200 million last year. This year we did a lot more. In fact, what we paid this year was meant to address the fertilizer subsidy in 2021, and that was around $524 million. So in 2020, the scale of subsidy was around 200 million. But what we offered in 2021 was around 524 million. So that has contributed to some of the spending pressures that has raised the deficit in 2021 compared to 2020. And also because of counter-cyclical policies, we have to scale up our public sector investments, especially domestically financed government investments rose up significantly in 2021. If you also remember, in 2021, there were a lot of security challenges. Yeah, I don't have to mention them. You know what happened in 2021 relative to 2020. So how to support our institutions that are responsible for ensuring security in this country. And we did that in 2021 with a significant amount of resources that in the history of this country has never happened. We were, maybe just give me a little time. Yeah. We also encountered 3 waves.
The next question is also coming to you.
Yes, we encountered 3 waves in 2020. So we had to also appropriately respond to it. But the scale of response we got from the partners in 2020 compared to 2021 was very different. It was much higher in 2020 than 2021. So we did a lot on our own in 2021 compared to 2020. So don't be surprised, the deficit nearly doubled compared to 2020. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jallow, for really elaborating on some of the challenges that might have, expanded the deficit in 2021. Like I said, the next question is also yours, right? And yeah, just to maybe pick on, where you left it, in terms of, looking ahead, what do you think the government needs to do in order to address, the macro fiscal challenges that the country faces?
Thank you very much. For macroeconomic stability, what we have observed, of course, with the consultation with our partners, the IMF, I mean here, the anchor of macroeconomic stability is centers around fiscal policy, and to be more precise about the level of debt, the level of public sector debt. And to maintain this fiscal stability in the medium term, our plan is to ensure that we bring down the present value of debt to GDP ratio from its current level of more than 70% to below 50% or below 55% in 2024, 2025. That is the overall objective. And to achieve that would require a lot of bold measures in the medium term. And one of them, of course, we notice that we depend heavily on international trade taxes, and we need to do a lot to mobilize domestic resources. And our partners, ourselves, together with our partners, have been doing a lot of efforts to mobilize domestic resources. One is to look at, review the tax base and see how we can increase the overage, because a lot of people are not paying tax. Currently, we are discussing that. It's at a very premature state, but in the medium term, we have to address this. We will come up with these measures in our subsequent budget statements. Secondly, we also have to increase tax compliance in this country. A lot of people are not paying tax. Enhance also our capacity to do tax audits, and focus more also on the digitalization or digitalizing our tax administration systems. Digitalization makes a lot of difference. So that's where we are on the domestic resource mobilization side, together with reforms in tax expenditures. Because if you look at it, we are able to save money that was redirected to domestically financed capital expenditures in 2021, which was equivalent to about $1.2 billion. We are able to do it, one, because of we are able to streamline our tax exemptions, or what we call tax expenditures. In 2019, it was around 2.8% of GDP. In 2021, in 2019, 2.8%, 2020, 2.5% of GDP, and we are able to bring it down to around 1.5% of GDP. So that has generated a significant amount of savings for government, which we were able to use to finance our capital expenditures. We are also looking at other innovative ways of generating domestic resources. And this minister also has been very instrumental in this. That is, looking at other creative means of, or instruments of generating resources to finance productive assets. And one way of doing this is to do what we call asset recycling. That is how you leverage on your existing assets and use the proceeds of those assets and invest them in more productive assets and follow that process. That is on the domestic revenue side. Secondly,
I don't know, maybe if you can help us to summarize.
To summarize, okay,
Yeah.
I'll do this very quickly.
Okay, thank you.
We try and also shift together with our partners. We use a lot of what we would have spent from our own resources. Our partners would be able to support us. And I can tell you that the European Union and the World Bank, I'll announce this here, are our key development partners. And they are the one providing to the government of the Gambia a significant amount of grants to finance most of our development objectives. We will also, in the medium term, strengthen our economic governance systems. By that I mean PFM systems, public procurement. Yes, so thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Jallo, again for elaborating on, what needs to be done in order to have macro fiscal stability in the Gambia. Really touching on, what you were doing in the domestic resource mobilization front, as well as, some of the things you were doing in terms of the public finance management. So thank you for sharing those insights with us. Right. So my next question, of course, goes to Mr. Barry. Maybe is to share some insights from maybe the IMF's perspective on what the country needs to do in the medium, in the short to medium term. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe just before going to that, I will touch on the budget. I think as the PS rightly mentioned, World Bank sector participation in the economy, and also the same as what was recommended through regional integration. I think Gambia is well located around several big countries that have a bigger market. So integrating Gambia to those markets, I think, will be important to help that private sector development, and also all the business environment reform that need to be done in the
he met one German professor that told him with regards to human capital development in the Gambia.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jawara. I think we need to invest more in human capital in the Gambia. Human capital basically means investing in education and health. We know that the percentage of GDP that we spend in education and health is really not that much. According to what is required for development, is definitely not to that level. I think we need to invest more in that to achieve development. Looking at the issue of inflation in the Gambia, we know that it's another problem too. Inflation is a big problem, but I feel that if we can invest more in education and health, that can also help in the long term to take up inflation challenges. Because the inflation problem is affecting everybody in the Gambia. Price of goods have been increasing for the longest, and now it's up to close to 11% now. But I feel that if we invest in education and health, people tend to be smarter. We invest in education areas that are relevant to our development. I think in those areas, if we can invest more in that, I think that can solve a lot of our problems in the Gambia. I feel that education and health, if we do more in that, I think definitely we can have a better country. I feel that these are the key things that we can definitely focus more in the Gambia. I know that for the fact that if you look at the Gambia, I always say that we move a long way when it comes to education and health in the Gambia. But it's just to invest more so that we can achieve more in terms of education and health in the Gambia. But I feel that the prospects are there. We have a lot of human capital in this country. It's just engaging people and see how we can do more when it comes to our development. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think that's a key message to take home from this session, which is we need to invest our on our human capital, right? Yeah. So thanks for that. I think maybe it's just reminding me that there is a question and answer session. So we'll now open up the discussion to the rest of the audience. If you have any question for the panelists, you can bring them forward. Thank you.
observed when both the permanent secretary and Mr. Barry and yourself were talking. I will try to be very brief. When you talk about education and health, I want to underline quality education. And I think that is important for us. Quality is top. And whatever we do, we must make sure that we deal with quality, because we live in a very competitive world today. And the PS talks about means of harnessing revenue collection and the rest of it. I think there is something key that he just omitted, that is the leakages that were in the system, that we did a lot to make sure we plug them. And there were a lot of leakages in the system, in the revenue collection system, and we did, as a government, we worked very hard to make sure that really they were addressed almost to 90%. You cannot stop it 100%. And I think that was very key. And when you talk about the diversification of the economy, generally, when it comes to tourism, as you have said, the World Bank today, we realized before COVID that there is going to be a problem in our international source market. And we initiated a program of promoting domestic and rural tourism, regional domestic tourism in the country. And what we saw was then, if we don't promote Gambians being tourists in their own countries, if there is a problem, we will have a problem. And if you look at the countries that have the highest domestic rate of tourism, we are the first to recover. Kenya about 34% domestic tourism. They were the first to come back in the market in Africa. Portugal have a very high domestic, and they were also the next one that came in. And the Gambia was aware of that, and that's why we decided to promote building lodges, other hotels, encouraging Gambian to build hotels in up country. The process is ongoing. Unless you have a middle class that can take advantage of the facilities in the country, you still have a gap. And I was in Senegal last weekend. We had a program there. I went to a hotel. When I started discussing with the manager, he said, we've been full every weekend with Senegalese coming in with their families on holidays. We've started seeing it happening in the Gambia. We have Gambians who don't know beyond Birkama. And that's why the culture-centered tourism program that we are now initiating with the World Bank, rehabilitating all our cultural sites, our heritage sites, bringing more culture and into tourism, will make a big difference for us. And again, we needed to diversify from the tourists that were coming to the beach, enjoying sea, sand, and so on. Because we needed to also attract the youths who go to Disney, who go to enjoy themselves, to the Gambia, which we lack. We don't have the entertainment facilities here. Although we were able to convince a Malaysian Chinese guy to invest $40 million in this facility, but because of COVID, the guy withdrew. Now we are diversifying our level of investment in terms of attracting different segments of tourists to this country. Unless we do that, you stand to be left out. And we have been very proactive. If you look at the period of COVID, when everybody was strengthening measures to stop people traveling, Gambia became the first country in Africa to relax its measures. We felt it was important to take that bold decision to say, when you are vaccinated, come to the Gambia without a PCR test. And that saved a lot of money. And that really gave us a boost in raising the level of arrivals. Prior to COVID, we had 59 flights before COVID. But by January, we've gone to 53 flights, recovery of our tourism industry by December, January. But because of this variant that came in, that was exactly that, again, that destroyed us. But I believe that the efforts that we are taking now, with the measures we are taking, and indeed with all our partners, all the players, everybody is on board. We need to diversify the product, get people new things, so that when they come, they have something that makes difference and value for money that they want to spend on. Today, as we speak, we have a project. Somebody just came to inquire. There is a type of hotel that pays $5,000 a night in Seychelles. The gentleman is already here. We are trying to see, even if we can get 20 beds of that product, it makes a difference, because there are clients who look for that. There are clients who are looking for a room for $1,000. There are clients who are looking for $50. So it depends, and you must make sure that you have all these facilities available in your country. So as a government, we did a lot also with regards to COVID response, because we have a centralized command center that all decisions we are taking on daily basis and actions were immediately swing into. And that, because of we have that central COVID committee, that makes a lot of difference for this government. And I think really talking about poverty increasing in the urban area, I think there is a factor that's been left out. That is the rural migration to the urban area has been huge the last 5 years or so. And that has really increased poverty because these are not people with resources. They come here, they try to find all sort of means to survive, leaving all their farmlands and everything there. And that makes it a little bit more difficult in the urban area. The pressure becomes more on utilities and resources. But once we start putting up electricity in the rural area, people have started going back. And I think as a government, we are conscious of that. If people have the facilities here, they will not stay here. They will go back and start living a better life. And I think this is where we need to also see how best we can develop strategies to encourage people. We are building road network. Right now, there is a lot of investment in terms of road infrastructure. And electricity by 2025, I think the entire Gambia will be electrified. And I think that will lessen the burden on the urban area here because the pressure on land, resources is huge. And that's why you have all these conflicts. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that comment.
Thank you so much for the panel. I am Omar Danso from Activist Study Gambia. And this goes to the PS, Mr. Jallo. We had your deliberation and understanding that based on the presentation that you made, the country focused on generating economic growth through tax domestically. This keeps me wondering, how do we actually move away from the poverty cycle when we continue to increase the tax burden on investors, knowing fully well that the payers of that tax is ordinary Gambians? We many a times celebrate DRA for mobilizing that huge resources. But what bearing does that have to ordinary Gambians? I think this is an area where we need to look at. These are issues that the country needs to look at in terms of creating wealth, not actually ripping it from people. And in addition, when we talk about tax burden, when we talk about debt burden, foreign debt is at the increase. When the country wants to invest, I think we need to look at how do we create wealth. But we cannot take those loans from countries, spend it on liabilities, and at the end of the day, it is not actually generating resources for the country. Then you realize that the country and its citizens will continue to be stuck in the poverty cycle. And I think GRA needs to be looked at, because even those who are actually working in the, not in the government, income tax from salaries alone will automatically discourage someone for working for some of those departments. Talk less of those who are actually in investment and so on. Thank you so much.
So you are Mr. Danso of? Huh? Activista. All right. Thank you very much. I hope you listened to my presentation with, I'm not sure whether, anyway, if you listen to what I have said, is that one is to increase the domestic resource mobilization through the following measures. And one is to increase the coverage, which is the tax base. A lot of people, poor people, are paying taxes, and you have many other people who have a lot better financially than the poor people who are actually not paying taxes. So that's where I'm coming from. Broaden it and cover those who should be paying tax to pay tax. I'm not talking about we should be in an environment where we'll keep increasing taxes. And by bringing some of them into the tax bracket, by extension, you are increasing your domestic revenues. And secondly, also, I talked about tax compliance, which is related to enhancing or expanding the tax base. You can even expand the tax base by creating incentives to encourage people to come and file and be compliant and be paying taxes. It just depends on the instruments you use to encourage them to come and pay taxes. That's one way of broadening it and increasing your domestic resource mobilization efforts. The other aspect has to do with tax audit, because you have a lot of poor people who are paying the right amount of taxes, and you have a lot of good number of businesses who are evading taxes by using other means of doing it. So if you strengthen your capacity to audit them, then you are able to increase your revenue without necessarily telling people, increasing taxes on people. The last one I said, it has to do with digitalizing your tax administration systems. When you digitalize, you raise the amount of revenues without necessarily increasing taxes. That's what I have said. Maybe you didn't listen to my presentation. The other one had to do with, you said that we are taking debt and investing them on non-productive assets. If you look at currently the debt that we are taking, it's mostly on the energy sector. Because you cannot, in modern days, you cannot grow your economy if your power supply or power system is not stable. You have seen what has just happened. This meeting would have ended if there was no continuous power supply in this conference room. So stabilizing and expanding the coverage of electricity is essential. And the World Bank and the European Union, together with government, is doing tremendous amount of efforts to ensure that there is one universal access of energy to all Gambians. And we do this by taking, to some extent, debt to finance these assets. If you look at the debt distribution, most of the debt we are taking is going to energy and other forms of infrastructure like roads, electricity, roads, education, and health. So if you say we are spending them on non-productive assets, maybe you will have to support me with evidence. Yeah. Moderator, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Jallo, for clarifying, what you meant by, what you meant in your presentation. So I think, I see some hands up, but unfortunately, we are constrained by time, and there is another session that should start. So I really apologize for that, but we have to draw the curtain here. Thank you very much, the panelists. I think you have made very fantastic deliberations and very useful insights on, the macro poverty issues, especially coming from the report. So thank you very much. Of course, we look forward to government taking up, some of the recommendations as well as, implementing them for the betterment of everybody. So thank you.
I think one of the key messages that came out of the last session was that we have to develop our human capital index. So to work on that, we have our specialists, social protection specialist, Penny Williams, Alison Glimsrin, our education specialist, and Samuel Mills, our health specialists. They will be talking about data for a better human capital index. So, but all of them are online. So you can bring them on the screen right now. They will do.
Thank you, Umi, for the introduction. Can I just check that you can hear us? Yes? Okay, I'm going to assume that you can hear us. Thank you very much for the invitation to address this economic update meeting today. I think the last session really set the stage for this section. Maurice and Sering described the COVID impact on the economy and on poverty. But of course, there's also been a very big impact on health and learning outcomes, setting back the gains of recent years. And of course, social protection also had a role to play in trying to mitigate some of the impacts on poorer households. So I think this is very timely. Delighted to hear some advocacy for investing in human development.
Penny, 1 second, we can hear you. Penny, you can start now. Hello, Penny, can you hear me?
Can you hear now?
Hello, Penny.
I think it might be an issue with the Gambia because I can hear you. I am connected online. I can hear you.
Same here, Penny.
We can hear you. Penny, we can hear you. Can you speak a bit louder?
Can you continue, please?
Alice and Sam, are you guys online? Maybe one of you can start before Penny.
Okay, can you hear us now?
We can hear you now. Alison, if you can hear us, yeah, you can go ahead.
Can Sam? Sam can't hear us. Sam, can you hear us? Can you talk?
Fidi, can you?
Alison, can you unmute yourself? Maybe we can hear you. Or Sam? Let me try to step in for my colleagues. I'm not an expert at all, so please take it with a pinch of salt, whatever I'm going to say here. So this presentation is about the special focus of the report. And we have analyzed in this report the aspect on human capital, and specifically the data aspect of the human capital, because we believe that data is a building block for reversed evidence-based policies and dynamic monitoring and evaluation. So can you move the slide for me? So we have looked at it across 3 sectors: social protection, education, and health. And we've looked at the status of these sectors, the challenges that they have in terms of data, the opportunities, and some of the policy options. Can you move the slides, please? Sorry about that. Yeah, we had 3 experts joining us offline, like virtually, but we could not hear them. So yeah, just to kick you start. So we have on the social protection, our main message is that the data is almost not there, and it's hampering effective policy making. And so one of the message that we would like to give is that this sector needs to collect more data, project data to avoid overlaps or gaps in programming, beneficiary data to improve service delivery and targeting, monitoring and evaluation data to improve impact by learning what works and why. And we also suggest that there has to be the use of innovation. We saw during pandemic times the use of phone surveys to get real-time feedback, or using the call data records to use existing data for new purposes. So it's not just that you have to use data for one purpose, it could be also used for multiple purposes. In the absence of data, programs are fragmented, potentially duplicative, inefficient, and not informed by evidence of previous success and failures. That's specifically the case for social protection. Can you move to the next slide, please? The second message that we have is to use data which more effectively. Can you go to the next slide, please? Oh, we are here at the policy options. But the second message was to basically use available data for multiple uses for effectively. And some of the policy options that we have listed in the report and here in the presentation are for specifically the overall government as well as for the SP sector. We are suggesting that the regular data collection needs to be budgeted by the government, including big surveys such as the household surveys, to reduce dependence on development partners. It's a long-term agenda, we understand that. And we are also suggesting that there has been a data protection law which has been pending parliament approval. That would be important if we are to use data for multiple purposes, specifically the data that would be coming up in the social registry. So that needs to be enacted to make sure that people are comfortable sharing their information. And the third is that we are suggesting that the databases need to be connected across the government to improve efficiency. In terms of specifically the sector itself, there is no annual report on the state of social protection sector, and that needs to come up based on data that is available and based on the programs that are being implemented in this sector. We are also suggesting that a framework on monitoring evaluation needs to be developed with aggregatable indicators with expectations set in that as part of that framework, and that framework can be institutionalized in all the projects and programs, as well as the social registry data, which is a very rich set of data. The use of that data within the government, with researchers, local government leaders, and all interested stakeholders, including academia, that would really benefit the country as a whole, because that information can be used across the whole realm of human development. So that finishes us on the on the social projection in education, the main big message that we have for you is that we have seen dividends being paid because there has been good investment in education data for some time now. The data collection is a lot better. It's improved, and we have seen that there have been some targeted policies using data to improve some of the aspects on education sector, primarily around access. For instance, school fees was removed to improve enrollment based on data that was available. Teachers were deployed in a much improved manner. Regionally, like the dispersion across region, and the disability inclusion programming was also done based on data that was available. And we have seen, as a result, improvement in learning outcomes. And here you can see some of the graphs that will give you a sense of the qualified teachers, proportion of qualified teachers by school level, and also by region. So you could see that in 2011, when probably the data situation was not as good as it was today, some of the regions, like region 4 and region 6, were having very low teachers for lower basic education. But in 2020, based on the data that's available, we see quite a bit of jump there. And that is basically because all of this investment in data helped government target some of the regions that were not having teachers. And we see this kind of improvement there. So some of the challenges that still remain in the education sector is about better integration on data sets. The household surveys are not frequent enough, so and that they cannot be the basis for some of those policies. The post-secondary level is still facing some data gaps issues. There is limited capacity to effectively analyze, report, and disseminate data around education aspects. It's very donor dependent. We understand that fully for now, but over the long term, it needs to go wean off and be on the government budget. Communities are not being engaged despite the information that's available, so that could be also one of good use of data in education sector to help communities support school systems and improve the overall schooling in their respective regions. The other challenge that we see is on quality. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, so here it's basically, this is a table that is showing us the service delivery indicators on Gambia. And if you see the classroom teaching time, the scheduled teaching time, the way it's all dispersed, if you would have seen just on the Gambia, you would have not gotten a sense of how it's working across the regions. So in that sense, some of these indicators are really giving a sense of what work policies are working, what not, when it comes to teachers training, when it comes to absenteeism, the knowledge, what the people are learning, the students are learning in the class. So these kinds of data is very powerful in terms of supporting evidence-based policies. So some of the policy options that we've put in the report and are also listed here is that the overall objective is to improve students' learning and data when it comes to data itself. And it's important that it's aligned with international proficiency measures. Teaching and learning is also important to be supported because that would help improve formative assessment. The learning data which is available can be used to drive policies to address critical gaps such as numeracy training, literacy trainings, improved teaching materials, timetables, how that can be evaluated, the language assessment that's being done. And we keep giving this message from this report to integrate data sources. So you would see this message across all three sectors that there is a need to better integrate data sources. And we somehow do not see data on youth employment and labor market as frequent as it should have been the case. So that's also a suggestion from our side to invest in that area. And the distribution of the data, the dissemination of the data is not being done. So the resources need to be devoted to that area for greater impact. On the health side, we have seen that there have been some very interesting initiatives lately in the sector, which has improved health outcomes, specifically the results-based financing. So we have seen that the quality of care score, which was collected quarterly, and it's a median score in the health facilities that was supported by the RBF, we call it the results-based financing. They increased from 77% in the first quarter of 2017 to 86% in 2018, which is quite a big improvement. And we could not have gotten a sense if the data would not have been available. So that's basically the primary purpose of having data, which was available on a much granular frequency. And then we also see in 2020 that in 5 regions that were supported by this mechanism of result-based financing, the QoC, the quality of controls care score, is significantly higher than in the 2 urban regions, not just the rural regions, the urban regions that did not have this mechanism. So that gives a sense that this policy, how this policy is really helping improve the health outcomes based on data, based on information that is available, and that if this information is available, which is right now, the government is now thinking of expanding this mechanism to those regions. Had this information not been available, they would not have been proactive in terms of expanding this facility. You can also see in the graph that there has been quite an improvement on the community-based companions versus referrals, the deliveries themselves versus referrals in these facilities. Some of the challenges on the health sector in terms of data is the following. There is an electronic district health information system which is there, but routine health data is collected by health facilities using paper-based systems, and it's then keyed into the system. It could result in delays in the availability of real-time data. It could result in higher rates of clerical errors in transferring data. So the main challenge that we see in the health sector is basically the increasing use of paper-based systems, which needs to be much more electronic and integrated. There is no electronic health information system on logistics, on human resource management, on medical records, on the health information system, as well as the CRVS, which is the Civil Registration and Vital Statistics. But these challenges, we do see that the government has taken note of these challenges, and they have started working on establishing open source web-based platforms to cover most of these systems, information systems. So some of the policy options are basically centering around the integration of data in the health sector. We are suggesting that the CRVS data and the National Health Information System needs to be linked with other government information systems, so that the accuracy of household information that goes into these systems and the identification can be improved, and that would reduce the burden on public to provide information every time they're going for services here and there in the government. And the second suggestion is about improving the quality of and digitizing the multiple sources of data required for the monitoring and evaluation. That would help quicker detection of emerging health threats, changing health trends, and that can then support the proactive policy making for the government to address those challenges or emanating threats. The third main suggestion that's coming from our report findings and from this special focus is about the data, quality of data that needs to be high, and that needs to come from multiple sources to inform annual health sector performance review meetings and track progress of the National Health Sector plan and policy. All of these policies have been made, but if data is not available for us to track the progress, there is essentially no feedback mechanism to do better, and in terms of also getting a sense of what is being implemented and what is not, and how we go about it. So these are, in a nutshell, some of our suggestions from these 3 sectors, primarily based on data, because we believe that data is the first foundational step towards moving forward with improving human capital accumulation in the country and helping the country realize its economic potential. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mehwis. To discuss the findings from this report and also how we can use data for human capital development. Sorry, let me get the agenda. I invite Ms. Fatim Baji, Communication Strategist. Then we have Dr. Ahmad Ba, Executive Director for NANA, Dr. Chernobari, Vice Chancellor, International Open University, and President of the Writers Association, Dr. Keba Marena, Executive Director, Westfield Clinic.
Good evening. My name is Fatim Baji, and like I was introduced, I'm a communication strategist from ACE Communication Executive, and it's my pleasure to be moderating this panel. We will be having a conversation today, and as already introduced, we have Dr. Marena, Dr. Bari, and Dr. Bahia. So I think the biggest challenge we have this evening is how can we get you stirred up instead of falling asleep. As you know, the presentation has been about data, and data is an area that is across every sector. As you can see from the presentations, you can already tell from your own sectors how it affects you in all areas. So we would like to get started on the perspectives, the opinions that we have of our panelists, and of course we would like you to come in and share your own views and opinions about it as well. So we have a conversation. So each panelist will have 2 minutes to discuss. I will be looking at the time, but we will not be having questions at the end. So if you want to contribute while a speaker says something, please raise your hand. I'll be more than happy for you to also engage the panelists. So we'd like to start with Dr. Ba. Thank you. All right. So as you can see, the report had indicated that in the area of social protection, more data is needed. And you have a background from the Nutrition Agency as the executive director, and you're also the project executive project coordinator for social protection, I believe. Wow. Yes. So your opinion really would be interesting to know what do you think about social protection data, where it's needed, and also how can data be better used?
Right, thank you very much, Fatim. I seize this opportunity to thank the bank for inviting me. Actually, I am not the coordinator of social protection, but actually the coordinator of the National Social Safety Net project, which is a bit different. But yes, you are right. Let me just step back from the question and indicate that quite often in the Gambia, we do lament the paucity of data. And to be fair, over the past years or past decades, we have been consistently collecting data from periodic surveys. This is the census, the mix, the demographic health surveys, and the integrated household survey. So yes, data could be a problem, but consistently we've been collecting these data, and it can be very useful for us. What we have not been doing a good job of is collecting real-time data and analyzing the data on time to be able to make swift decisions and make sure that we monitor the progress that we are making in our interventions. So yes, I agree that in the short term to the medium term, we should explore existing data within the country that can be built on. One example of this is the social registry that is being collected by GBOS, and it's reposed at the National Social Protection Secretariat. This registry has a huge potential, and in the future it can be linked to data, as has been highlighted in the report. It can be linked to databases that are already available within the country. And this, we at NANA have seen the potential, because right now we are working on the NAFA, and I am glad to see that the NAFA is being presented here as one of the interventions that has contributed to the economy of the country during very dire times of the COVID. And I can tell this gathering that the NAFA was targeted to the poorest districts and the poorest households in this country. And the targeting is important, and social registry can do that, help you target. And in July of this year, we will be rolling out to 17 more districts after our pilot, making it 20 of the poorest districts that we are going to roll out the NAFA to build resistance of the poorest households in this country. And the social registry can do that.
That's excellent. Thank you for that. Now, as you can also tell, Dr. Ba, I'm still on you, the policy, there were recommendations in the report.
Wow.
Right? And the recommendations were talking about areas in which data could be really enhanced, the utilization of data. Out of the recommended areas, which one do you think is achievable as we speak right now?
The easiest would be to leverage on the existing data. This is the DHS, the Integrated Household Surveys, but also the social registry. Like I have said, the social registry, it's a potential. It's a potential that we need to explore. And explore, make sure that making it available is easy for those who are implementing interventions. So that is important, and that would be the easiest thing to do at the moment.
Thank you for that response. We would like to move on to another speaker unless anyone would want to add anything. And while we have hands coming, I just want to also just elaborate a bit on the report to say that the report had indicated recommendations of a budget within the government to have regular data collection. Another recommendation was to enact data protection and privacy law, which is to improve the security. And the last one was connect databases across government to improve efficiency. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Baji. I believe that this topic is very, very important because I think for developing countries, if we are going to leapfrog the development cycle, data is important. But most importantly, digital data. I just came back from the US, and I needed to access my driving record from 40 years ago. I was able to go online, paid $23, and got my driver's license dating back to 40 years ago. The same thing applied with my Social Security. I went online, created a username, password, and I got my Social Security benefits. I also graduated 40 years ago, and I was able to go online, pay a fee, and got my certificates dating back 40 years ago. So my question is, why can't we leverage on technology as we have it now to access our birth certificates, our driver's license, our title deeds, and so on and so forth? Thank you.
Wow, very good contribution and question. Anyone want to respond to that? Yes, sir. Please feel free as well from the panelists to respond. Yes, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to add a few things on what Dr. Bahan said. It is true that we have paucity of data, but we all agree that a lot has happened in the few years. And the challenge we face in this area is definitely conducting regular activities, because what I mean by that is that we've conducted the DHS, the IHS, and the mix and show, but sometimes the problem is conducting it regularly. Like, for example, we're supposed to conduct the economic census every 5 years as recommended internationally, but the last economic census was conducted since 2014. You can't call that regularly, in the sense that it should have been conducted every 5 years. These are the challenges that we face, even though we've conducted a series of activities. And also, I think the other thing is what will help us a lot is ensuring that we have a CRVS system here that works. Yes, we have a CRVS system, but we can't call that a CRVS system. It's a multi-sectoral system, but should be a system that links what all these sectors are doing. But this is not happening. And for us to move as a country, like what Dr. Ture has just mentioned here, this is only possible in an environment where you have a system that can track whatever you do, where one has a unique identification number, and everything that happens to you in your lifetime is linked to that. So this will really involve a lot of investment, but this is the show way if we want to really go on with data. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In fact, I think what your contribution has a lot to relate to Dr. Marena here, who is the Gambia's first orthopedic surgeon, and he's also currently working and heading over the Westfield Clinic, and also the Trauma and Orthopedics Center at the Edward Francis Small Hospital. Now, as you can just hear, one of the participants just mentioned consistency and data collection. As you're working currently in the health sector, can you please share with us how you, in your own view, see universal coverage being attained, and in what areas is data lacking the most?
Thank you. I think, in healthcare, we always talk about evidence-based medicine, and I think we also have to look at that when we talk about policies. They also have to be evidence-based policies, and for that, you need data in order to use the data to guide you to decide where you're going to use your resources. Especially if we're admitting or agreeing that we have limited resources, then you have to make sure that where you put them, it's where they're needed in terms of healthcare. So for that, we need data. And as speakers have said, it is lacking in certain areas, and we need to see how we plug those holes. We see that a lot of the data is collected on paper. We've seen how that can cause problems in terms of transferring it, and also in terms of the lack of real-time data. So to give you contrasting examples, for example, at Westfield Clinic, if I leave here today and go there, as soon as I turn on my computer, I can tell you exactly how many patients have come to the clinic today, what their ages were, what their ranges are, how it differed from yesterday, how it differed from last week. I can tell you all the medicines that have been prescribed in the last week. Whereas when you go to somewhere like the government system, we're formulating policies, we have the HIS data. However, it may surprise people to know that EFSTH does not contribute to that data. EFSTH being the largest hospital, the tertiary referral hospital that sees all the complicated cases in the country. So if you use that data to formulate policies, then you're missing a huge chunk. It makes it very difficult to get accurate data. So being able to have accurate data, real-time data, will change how we use the resources that we have.
Thank you very much. Anyone want to respond? Yes. Yes, sure.
I am the current Vice President of the Medical and Dental Association of the Gambia. That was Dr. Musa Marena, who's the former president of the Gambia Association of Resident Doctors.
Well, at least one thing is for sure, that all Marinas are from Kudang, I believe so, right? So I'm sure he can respond to that. Right. Right. Thank you very much. So we just have another participant. If you just please introduce.
Thank you very much. My name is Jonathan Lewis, representative for UNICEF, not necessarily for Dr. Marena, but I just wanted to mention two issues regarding not necessarily the availability of data, but one area where I believe that especially routine monitoring data is not being used sufficiently, and that is how to use this data to begin identifying the intersectionalities between different sectors to address the issue of inequalities in the country. The Gambia is a very highly unequal society and economy, and one of the things that we can do more is the extrapolation and the cross-fertilization of education data sets, health data sets, nutrition data sets, poverty data sets, to really begin identifying what are the real drivers of inequality in the country. And I don't think that we're there yet. There are a lot of efforts that have been made in order to get there, but I do think that that's a particularly important element to look at. And the second point is that, you know, the other side of evidence-based policymaking, not only data sets, is robust evaluations. And one of the areas where I believe that we're lacking in the Gambia is good metrics to measure how evaluations can contribute not only to designing policies, but to improving those policies. And some of those metrics could be, for example, just very basic information regarding how many individuals in the Gambia are actually evaluation science professionals. So a lot of people do evaluations in the country, but very few of the individuals who do evaluations are actually trained evaluation science specialists. That could be one metric that we could be looking at. Another metric could be, what is the proportion of sectoral budgets in education, in health, nutrition, social protection that are actually devoted to conducting robust evaluations? And a third metric could be how many evaluation findings are actually responded to at very high senior levels. So for example, if you had a number of evaluation recommendations coming out of, let's say, the performance of different social safety nets, and recommendations are made to cabinet ministries and different layers, is to monitor what is the proportion of those evaluations, recommendations that have actually been addressed and incorporated into future policy making. So it's not just about monitoring, but also about strengthening the institutional culture of evaluation in the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much for raising that point. I think definitely there's a need for capacity building in this area, and also, as you have said, how to better utilize data. And I'm sure that all those who are here, stakeholders, will be looking closely into that. I'd just like to go on a lighter note to the education sector and just kind of involve Dr. Barry here. Oh, we have a question? Oh, I didn't see that. Hadija, I'm sorry.
Thank you. I'm Saturday, and really thank you to the World Bank, and congratulations to FEI and Mehwish for this excellent launching. Actually, my question is related to the presentation he did on human capital and the data on education, which is extremely useful. And I think for the Gambia to have access to this information, it would be very good to see how to trickle down this information to the population, because we are in an era whereby people are very so keen on accountability and knowing what is going on. So, and I think the panel that we are having now and what Dr. Marena just said shows that if you have this data available and usable, it will help to improve the services. And my question on education is, with the figures you have, does it cover all the education system, including the madrasas, or is mainly a part of the education? Thank you.
I'm just trying to speak. I don't know if anybody can hear me. It's Allison, the education specialist.
Alison, we can hear you.
Okay. Is it okay if I take that question since I wasn't able to present?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So first, I think your first point is critical. I don't know if this came through, and thanks a lot to Maywish who took on the big task of trying to present all three sectors. But it's a critical point, right? So there's been really good efforts to be able to put out school report cards, which is, kind of a snapshot of what schools look like and how they're performing, that communities can then use. But I think more needs to be done in this regard, right? To make data available to families so they can better understand the education challenges and make informed decisions and hold schools and government accountable. On your second point, the data varies. So the Education Management Information System does collect extensive data on the madrasas, public schools, grant-aided schools, all kinds of schools, private schools. The data that's presented in the service delivery indicators is a mix of schools, but mainly public schools. But it's a nationally representative sample that was used. And the other enrollment statistics that we use also represent the subsector of schools, the cross-section of schools. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I think that answered the question. So we'll go to Dr. Barry here. As we know, data helps improve development outcomes. And the report has highlighted your area, and it showed some progress in improving access for students. But in your view, can you share with us what more needs to be done to use data in terms of improving quality?
Thank you very much. Thank you also for the invitation to participate here. Let me probably link from what Sister Aissata Day just mentioned when the question of trickling down data to the local population, and most importantly to also local authorities that would be able to use that to improve in the quality, because here we link it with the quality. I'm sure for those who know the data presently in education, one can attest that among all the school-going children, not more than 40% really complete the whole cycle of education. A lot of effort has been made in the area of what we'll call primary, but here we will call it the basic cycle level, meaning the lower and upper basic cycle. And a lot of investment has been done in the area of access, the training of teachers, the provision of equipment and infrastructure. So one can safely say that when it comes to the lower and upper basic cycles, we've really achieved hugely, in that area. Now, the question lies post-basic now, at secondary school level. This is where the challenge begins. And the challenge is primarily more in the area of teacher training. Because initially when the expansion happened, the first problem was finding adequate teachers who have both the content knowledge and the pedagogy to be able to provide the services that are required to improve the quality at secondary school level. And I'm sure most of us have been alarmed in the previous years when we see the data of a number of children leaving secondary school, and just few of them, a lower percentage, really having access to what is required to give them university education. And I think where we point the finger at is basically now where we can improve the teacher training. But then you will also see that because we don't have the data, it becomes very critical to have the actual number of, or the adequate information that would tell us clearly the teachers where their deficiency lies, where their competency are. For example, we have the teacher competency tests and the service delivery indicators that have shown that there is a low competence in the area of teachers, particularly in those core subjects, mathematics, for example, and numeracy. So, and these are very core and critical in improving the quality of learning for every child. And as a result, what happens now is the Gambia College has already started what we call this exit examination that has been supporting in improving and identifying where the deficiency is when it comes to teacher training in mathematics and English. But then we still have this huge gap, irrespective of all the efforts that have been done at Gambia College. So what are we targeting now? We need to know critically through that data, how many teachers do we need? What are their competence areas particularly? And then collect that information to show how many, what is the distribution of those teachers with that competency across the country. Otherwise, what we will get qualified teachers put in every school, yet without that clear data, we will not know where the deficiency lies or where the challenges are in some of the schools and how to address those challenges. Like if one school has areas in challenges in English and mathematics, how many teachers do we have within the region that could cover that area? Or do we have enough teachers trained, for example? Before we close this chapter, let me just say, we have a major issue about planning. Planning is the big problem. We need to be able to have enough data to say, okay, look, in the next 1, 2, 3 to 5 years, we need this number of teachers trained every year for this number of, exit teachers coming out, both from the Gambia College or from the higher, institutions, so that they can cover the gap in that clear plan, so that as we build access, as we build the infrastructure, as we are expanding to give access to secondary school, we are in parallel providing the adequate qualified teachers to cover that gap. Otherwise, we will end up having maybe a lot of students, less competent teachers, and naturally, the outcome would always be disastrous. That is the area where the quality now will fall considerably.
Right.
I have to say that some efforts are on. Like in the International Open University that I had, we've already entered into an agreement with MOPSI. We've been trying to bridge those teachers who have finished Gambia College with a high teacher certificate in their specialized areas. We are strengthening their content and their pedagogy so that they would now go into the secondary school and help. But it is at a very low space. And I think we need to accelerate a little bit to really address the issue of quality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Barry. Of course, as most of you know, Dr. Barry has ample experience, having been a permanent secretary for higher education, Ministry of Health, Social Welfare, and have participated in so many areas in terms of development. So I know this is your area, but I just want you to quickly tell us, based on the recommendations from the report here, what do you see as priority recommendation areas that you think can be achieved at this moment? And then we'll open the floor. Okay. Dr. Barry, you want to give that question a chance before you respond to the question, or?
Okay, let me probably just take it up here, because we've already got 3 priorities I will give. And certainly the panel, the people on the floor, I'm seeing that excitement already growing. Let us begin by relevance. Let's talk about relevance, because the most important element of all in any development effort is that we need to have the relevant type of education. And I'm sure this has been a debate going on among a lot of Gambians, whether the type of education that we've been having are relevant. Yes, universities have been coming up, they have been churning out a lot of graduates, but are these people all relevant to the development aspirations of the country? Are they all aligned to the national development plan of this nation? Let me just tease a little bit my Honorable Minister of Tourism here. For example, in the tourism sector, what are the capacity gaps that we have? Have we really made an assessment, a capacity assessment, to know what are the capacity gaps in the whole tourism sector? And if it is there, then how are we engaging now the education sector so that there's a link between industry and education? Because you see, education should not just go in isolation. We cannot just keep training people, to become economists or somebody will say doctors are needed. So Dr. Marine will agree. But even among the doctors, how many specialized areas do we have? How many people are still traveling across the border just for some of these specialized areas? We don't only need doctors, we need specialized doctors in the critical areas that this country needs. But this will all have to be shown when we have the data that determines the needs in the health sector, the needs in the tourism sector, the needs in the agricultural sector, so that then we map out a training plan, and then we engage the private sector, we engage the public sector in the institutions to train. Another issue is about tracer studies. The people who have been trained, have we been following up to see whether they have been able to progress in the area of training that they have been given. Now, this is important because that is when we will be able to determine whether we have been building industries, whether the entrepreneurs have been building up what we call wealth internally. Because if we are able to build competencies within our institutions, and there is no trade or study, we don't even know whether those who have been trained are really providing a return to the economic boost or economic development of this country. Right. So these are the three most important elements I wanted to note, but I'm sure the floor is excited to contribute.
Yes, please. Can we have participants? Yes, please. Could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. My name is Ndeye Rosar. I'm the UNFPA representative in the Gambia. Thank you for the invitation, and we are really happy that we are talking about the real issues. The one thing that I wanted to add is the issue of population, because everything we are doing is only relevant when we know how many we are, what are the projections, and whether or not women and girls of this country are, empowered enough so that we don't have 7, 8 children per woman, and then no classrooms, no health centers, no hospital will be able to catch up with the issue of the population, and also knowing, and I'm happy that our colleague from the Gambia Bureau of Statistics is here, it's also the projection on what do we want, the demographic dividend, how are we going to address the issues of women and girls, education, the data on the population at any given time, as you said, so that we plan ahead. So it's not just about the quality, but also the numbers needed, the forecasting needed for everything to happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Honorable.
Dr. Barry, you were present at a forum where we discussed our policy, and these gaps were identified. And the policy dictates our strategy, and you were part of it. Thank you.
So may I just ask the participants, yes, Mr. Tal, as you come in, would you say that the need, Mr. Tal, you can even answer that, would the need be more for strategy or planning based on what how the conversations are going?
Thank you very much for giving me that question and for the invitation. I think it's very important when we have these discussions, we try as much as possible to be real, like my sister has said. Every data set you see, when it grows up, it wants to be useful information. And that information also, when it grows up, it wants to become useful knowledge. I think my point is this. We have a very siloed approach to the generation, management, and utilization of data. We need to have a value chain approach when we talk about data. For example, in education, in health. I'm very pleased that Dr. Marina is both a CEO and working also for the public sector. And I think Gambia will not move forward unless and until we find that sweet spot where we can collaborate. Public-private partnership, or now what they are talking about, the planet and the people are also necessary to be in collaboration. So the data that we generate, we need a plan for it. We need a vision for it. China at some point decided to have one child. Now they have abolished one child policy. And the demographic dividend she's talking about is that all these data sets, once we synthesize them, once we analyze them, they will be able to respond to our development challenges. So this is, for me, there is a need for integration, and there is a need also for making it not about just the graphs and the percentages. It's about lives. And these are things that sometimes when we discuss at this high level, I think it was President Ward who said that nobody eats 5%. Or 7% or whatever. So these things are important when we talk about them. Economic development, economic update, these are about life and death. And in the Gambia, we need to be serious about data. I think our Doyen Ablai Toure has just said it. You have to think about the future as much as what you have done in the past. Okay. Gambia is a very small country. It's twice the size of Singapore. We can become a city-state. We should stop thinking about this rural-urban drift. It's a myth. It's not true. It doesn't exist. But our planning, especially when we look at the data, 2 million people, that is not even the population of Dakar.
Right.
So for me, these are the kind of things that we really need to emphasize when we are talking about economic transformation and economic development.
Thank you. Very much appreciated. I think here some very key words are coming out. We're talking about integration. We're talking about strategy, matrix, monitoring, evaluation, capacity gaps. I'd like to go back to Dr. Marina here before I get back to you, Dr. Ba. There's this very particular area that our gentleman here from statistics has mentioned, which is the civil registration, what is it called again? Civil registration vital. Civil registration vital statistics. Correct. Thank you for that. Now, this is the system, of course, that, as you can see from the presentation done earlier, indicated just a simple card that was integrated. From your experience currently, from both public and private, as elaborated by Tal, how useful do you see this for Gambia as we speak now, looking at the demographic, looking at the way in which, as rural-urban migration is happening and the likes, how useful do you think and timely this is a much-needed system?
I think the advent of that really would be what we'd call a game changer. As Dr. Toure has said, we need to digitalize our data, because then you can do a search to find anybody you want. If every single Gambian is registered and has a number that you can track and trace, that changes the way healthcare is going to run in this country. If we look at one of the problems with having an electronic medical record system in government is having a unique identifying number. Sometimes people have 5, 6 numbers in the same hospital because every time they come, they bring out a paper card and nobody can trace the old one, so they just open a new one. In a private hospital, it doesn't exist. I can just type in your phone number or your name and I can find you very easily, and I can find everything that has happened to you over the last year or so, because it is easily there and easily available. If we have that with the National Health Insurance System also coming in, where people should have a unique identifying number, then you'll be able to know, you'll be able to look at movements of people, you'll be able to look at where diseases are more prevalent, because people will be registered and this data will be registered with them. So everything will be with this person's number or registration, and it will make the way we run our hospitals more efficient. It will enable us to use our resources more judiciously.
And I'd just like to move that to Dr. Ba, and thank you for those views. Dr. Ba, how does Dr. Marina's response actually relate to social protection in your view, and looking at the recommendations as well? How best can these areas be implemented in Gambia?
Actually, there are efforts already being taken. I'm sure if Sam Mills was able to come into the conversation, he may have mentioned what's happening with the Ministry of Health, where birth registration is being digitalized. And that is a step forward to make sure that what Dr. Marina is saying about this unique identifier for the person, like the statisticians would want to put it, would be for everybody across the country. So efforts are being done, and the World Bank is supporting it. So I think it might be late, but better late than never. So something is being done. Like I have also said, the social registry, it's going to help us to make sure that the targeting that should be done is done appropriately. So the little resources we have is not overstretched, it's not spread to people who are definitely, who should not be in a position to benefit from those resources. I want to also add, in terms of progress, that Mr. Toure, there is already a World Bank preparatory project that's going on. And this is the West Africa Regional Digital Integration. The project is being put together, and this project is going to help in terms of digitalizing the economy, but it's also going to help in terms of these database linkages that we are talking about, so that databases can be linked and they can communicate, and targeting and giving of services will be much easier. For instance, if somebody comes for a service, you can see from the database controlled by another party as to how that person is lacking in something that he or she can benefit from. So I think there are issues that are already on the pipeline, and I hope in a few years' time they will be fruitful for the Gambia. Let me just quickly add on the evaluation. This is a very important point, especially for a country like the Gambia, because if we don't evaluate what we are doing, then we don't know where we are going. We will be implementing a lot of interventions that we don't know the outcome of. And it is important that we do. The results-based financing is being mentioned here. That was piloted by NANA and partners, the Ministry of Health. And because it was successful, it is now being replicated by the Ministry of Health and scaling it up and seeing the benefits. So we have to make sure that we evaluate what we are doing.
Right. Thank you very much for that. We also have online Alay Bara, the Director for Social Protection, who wanted to also add his voice to Dr. Ba's intervention. Are you there?
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much. First, I would like to thank the panelists and all the discussions since in the start of the program. I think what has showcased today is that as a country, we are trying to look at, from macro level to micro level, how we can make social protection as a mechanism for inclusive development. This is what the conclusion that I would have drawn here, looking at all the discussions. And when I talk about social protection here, I'm not only talking about protective social protection, but I'm talking about preventive social protection, promotive social protections that looks at job creations and trying to build resilience for those who are already above the poverty line, not to fall below the poverty line, and also to look at transformative social protection schemes. So basically, as the National Coordinator for Social Protection and the Secretary, I think this is the key issues that we have discussed is very key and very timely for us with regards to alleviating poverty in this country. When you look at the macro discussions, fiscal resilience will depend largely on how we are able to build and strengthen our social protection systems. During these shocks, countries with an enhanced and strengthened social protection system really were able to cope with social protection and with a reduced fiscal risk. But if you look at the developing countries, this is not the case. We have to turn around all our fiscal projections and come up with, because we do not have the provisions already in our budget. That is why the approach that they are talking about with regards to making social protection sustainable through budgeting, I think is one of the key that that is very important at this juncture. And as a secretariat, we are talking about data. The social registry, thanks to Mr. Ba for coming up with that brilliant, comments on the needs for social registry. The social registry that is being developed under the management of the Social Protection Secretariat is there to help programs identify their potential beneficiaries, making them more responsive to social, more responsive to SOCs, because they wouldn't need to be going around to look for their for the information on their beneficiaries. But not only that.
Thank you, Mr. Bara. I'm sorry, we would have loved to hear more, but we have some hands up.
All right, I will just conclude here on this, on few things that we have. With regards to social registry, we are trying to cover the whole country.
Sir,
we have collected data.
Mr. Bara, please.
And we have the urban areas that is left. And making the, in terms of budgeting, I think sustainable financing strategy is needed for us to make our social protection programs more sustainable. And in this regard, with the support of the World Bank also, we are developing a financing strategy.
Hello, sir.
And this is also spearheaded by Ministry of Finance. And I hope that these things will make our country resilient as far as stocks are concerned and our preparedness as far as social
passionate about social protection
to deal with social protection.
If anything, now
so
we
I
know
think
that this system is coming to Gambia.
I'm sorry for the time that I have taken, but I think it was it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You're most welcome. Thank you very much. Okay, we have Sam who has his hand up. Or it could be Sam Lady. I'm sorry. Could you kindly introduce yourself?
It is Sam Man. I'm Sam Mills with the World Bank. I'm currently in DC. If I may share my screen, I wanted to chime in on the civil registration and vital statistics system that was mentioned earlier. It's not a distant dream. The ministry has undertaken preparation efforts to have a mass registration for birth registration that is linked to the national health insurance system. All these preparations were done as far back as January. What has held the initiation of the mass registration has to do with the late appointment of the CEO for the National Health Insurance Authority. For now, all these preparations have been done. Fortunately, the CEO was selected.
Mr. Sam, I'm so sorry. Can he hear me? Yes?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you for sharing with us what it would look like and for elaborating. We're actually running out of time.
Okay, no, that's fine. So all I want, in the nutshell, what I want to say is that there is going to be a mass registration, birth registration. Individuals are going to receive a birth certificate with a unique identification number and a QR code. At the same time, they are also going to receive
That's progressive. Thank you so much.
A national health insurance card with a national health insurance card also with a QR code. The rollout of the mass registration may be in the next few weeks or so. Wow. So stay tuned. It will be announced in the media. But I just wanted to assure you that preparations have been done for this and it will be implemented in the next couple of months. Thank you. Over.
Thank you very much. Well done. Thank you. Well, Dr. Baisi, that a lot of work has been ongoing. And we would have loved to speak more about integration and to look at how this actually relates to children who are going to schools from the education area to help the private sector as well. There are hospitals there. Would love to hear it. But I have a question for Honorable Ba before you leave. How can Gambia develop the culture of collecting data? And is data being collected? Because we can say data all day, but if you don't collect it, how can we analyze, process it, and use it?
Well, I think what is more important is question of awareness and the importance of data. Number one, people must have confidence. They have reason why they give it, the benefits of giving it. In the absence of that, it's totally impossible. When I was in Parliament, I remembered in 2002, I raised an issue of having what we call birth certificate campaign registration in the country. Because we realized that other sub-regional countries are doing it. We saw people like us, some of us never had birth certificates until many ages. And we realized that people were disadvantaged, particularly those who were in the rural area. We felt it was important to get government to organize this program. Thank God now the program is on. But what is important today is people must know the value and the importance of data. If they know the importance of data and the benefit of data, they will certainly get it. During the COVID distribution of funds, during distribution of support, there were people who refused to give out their data. They refused to disclose all the information about their family. When they saw people being given so much of bags of sugar and rice, they came back, tried to volunteer their data to the statistics, but it was too late for them. So I think educating people, telling them the benefit and the importance of data would help us in making sure that we gather the data that we need.
Thank you.
And then storage, I think that's important too. We must be able to store data. And I'm very impressed with the example that Mr. Maren have given. Government have more resources to do this, but it's happening more in the private clinics.
Now, just to take things from where you are, you said government has resources, so we just go to our Honorable Minister of Finance here, right? Please, sir, the recommendations have mentioned that there's budgeting for some of these information systems that are coming. There's also, we're still a country that heavily depends on donors' funding, and we know how data is important to our partners. So, in your own view, and in terms of what also is aligned with government strategy, financial strategy, can you share with us what plans you have to help our dear brothers and sisters in the various sectors? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think when people talk about data, we at the Ministry of Finance are in the forefront. My permanent secretary has just alluded to digitalization drive that is at the forefront of what our plans are. Data is the new gold. If you don't have data, whatever you do is just guesswork. Even if you come to health. That's why many people are now, even in some countries, they are making Apple Watch a health kit because of its ability to capture so much data about you. So as a government, if we don't develop, manage our policies and implement them using data as the benchmark, it leaves a lot of room for substandard results. That is why in the new project that is coming up, which is being formulated, it is at the central stage of what we do. And even before we get to that stage, we in our own way will deploy resources as needed to address this acute need. Thank you.
So as you hear, he said they were prepared to provide the funding, and the commitment is there, and hearing it from you is very good. And we've seen the moves that the government has made towards digital finance and the likes. I'd just like Dr. Barry to conclude on behalf of the panel, if you don't mind. Dr. Barry, given your experience, what is the hanging fruit in terms of achievable milestones, looking at the recommendations here in terms of data for human capital?
I think first of all, we will now be hopeful. First of all, when you hear that the resources are available, when you hear the extraordinary strides already made with regards to the digitalization that is going on. What we anticipate now, I think, is the level of preparedness in the collection of data. And the DBOS is around. I think we should now look at it from the whole mapping system. Let's take, for example, a child who is born and who has now got an identity from birth, and then goes to school. The student's performance can be seen, can be followed, but also at the same time, all the challenges, you know, mostly what we always think about the child, just the child being the nucleus of everything. When you think about the child is that if all the factors are surrounding the child, health, education, and all the social, you know, like it is done in the US, what happens eventually is that the growth of the child would now allow let's say, that opening of the flower, that flowering of potentials, you know, and then it will also give the child the opportunity within that system to make the choices that are probably right for that child. You know, the education we have is probably enforced on the child, but maybe eventually what will happen, the child will have a choice, maybe to go into Tibet, to go into skills development, to go into scientific innovations and things like that, without having to be obliged to follow a pattern that is already imposed by a system. And I think it is all going to start from the moment we start planning about that data collection and that identity creation of every individual in our society. And then the planning will now begin, and the forecasting will be there. Thank you very much, just to make it short.
Thank you very much. Did you want to add anything, Dr.?
I just want
one split second
to say that in order to overcome these difficulties, government need to invest in the data collection. and the investment should be sustained. It's not where it is this year financial, we have it, next year we don't. It has to be sustained so that we will be able to collect the data we are supposed to collect and make the informed decisions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Marina, last words?
I think we've heard everything here, and I think what we've seen is very encouraging. That's the main thing here. We see that we're making headway, we're making progress, and it's just to make sure we harness it. We mine this data, and we mine the data we're going to get from having this unique system, and making sure, as Mr. Tal has said, that it becomes information becomes knowledge, and we use that in the best possible way.
Thank you very much. I just want to say one last thing before we close, is that we've said a lot of planning, and I hope that we will look back at veterans and look back at the likes of Excellency Toure and the likes who already have ample of years working in planning and the area in finance and strategy to actually also contribute. So it's always good if we're addressing capacity gaps of a nation that we also look at those who have had those experiences. Lastly, I think the presentation we had said something important, but it was missed. And it says you can have data without information, but you cannot have information without data. So that was said by Daniel Moran. And on that note, I'd like to thank all of you for participating, and for our panelists, thank you so much.
Thank you, Fatim, for moderating that wonderful session. But now, it's a bit late now. I will call on our resident representative to give the closing remarks. Faye.
I'm so pleased to see everyone still here. Thank you all so much for coming. I want to thank our honorable ministers. I know Minister Keita just came back after weeks on a business trip. So thank you so much for prioritizing and staying the entire time. Honorable Minister Ba, thank you for your support. Honorable Minister Jang, let me make sure I'm saying it correctly since I just met you, Madam. Manjang, nice to meet you. Thank you so much for coming, our Honorable Minister of Environment. Thank you so much to our diplomatic partners. Thank you to PS. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to my colleagues. We're very pleased because when we put a lot of time into these reports, we actually want to disseminate. The most important part is to share the information and to facilitate dialogue. And, we had to actually beg our panelists to please wrap up. So I'm very glad that we've had really important dialogue today. I want to talk about some of the takeaways that we had in the areas of fiscal resilience, in the area of strengthening governance, in the area of data. We're going to tweet your statement, data is gold. I've told we have to tweet that. That is an excellent statement. Data is the new gold, really. And we want to say that we're not just writing reports for report's sake. All these areas that we have discussed today, under the new World Bank Country Partnership Framework, we're going to be working with the government in all these areas. So yes, we will find funding for the needs that we have discussed. These are really difficult times, and it's really a pleasure to be able to discuss what the Gambia has done to weather the times and what needs to be done going forward. So these are not just empty discussions. These are not academic discussions. These are discussions that really matter to the people of the Gambia. So I want to thank the team for putting this together. I want to thank, of course, first of all, Hadija and Aji. Where's Aji? Who have been working tirelessly, Ajiumi, on putting this together and making sure that everything goes smoothly. Thank you to them. I want to thank the teams who actually put this work together. We have all of them online, unfortunately, and then you couldn't, but I think finally they were able to engage. We have Alison Grimsland from Education. We have Sam Mills, Health. Everyone that is in the health sector in the Gambia knows Sam Mills. We have Penny Williams, who has actually left the social protection team in the Gambia, but still remains engaged. Thank you so much, Penny. And then we have Sering, our poverty economist, who's actually done a lot of interesting work on poverty, some of which you saw here. We have a poverty assessment coming out. And then finally, the star of the event, Maywish Ashraf, our country economist. And you know, this is bittersweet for us. We wanted to make sure we had this today because she's leaving the Gambia tomorrow after 3 years, and we really celebrate her. You've seen her work today. The Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs doesn't know what they're going to do without her. We really are so pleased that she was able to be here for these 3 years and really work with the Gambian government over the past 3 years to weather the COVID pandemic. And she's leaving us, but she's not leaving us empty-handed. We have our new country economist, Ephraim. Ephraim, please stand so they can know you. And he's coming here from Burundi, yes. And he just arrived in time for this, so he's going to be meeting with you all as well. So Maywish, thank you. We wish you all the best. She's heading to Fiji, which is in competition with the Gambia in terms of tourism, another tourism destination. And we wish you all the best. We just want to present you with a little token. This is our office presentation. We captured a little bit of our memories of Maywish, and we're wishing her goodbye and good luck. Thank you, Maywish. Okay, we've kept you long enough. We have a short reception upstairs where we're going to have some snacks.